Start. Yeah, Joe's saying just to start.
Okay, we'll make a start. My name is Owen Hopkins. It's my pleasure to be chairing this In Detail webinar, which is celebrating the RIAS Special Category Award winners for 2026. I had the great pleasure and privilege of being one of the judges alongside Chris Dyson, Eiley Izzat, and Anna Liu. We shortlisted 14 buildings, visited them all, and we awarded 10 winners with a further 5 special winners. Um, this is the second of the In Detail series. Please head to the RIAS events page if you'd like to sign up for the next 3 weeks of Wednesday webinars. Just to say, today's webinar will be recorded and will also be available on YouTube shortly. And you can always catch up with the first session if you missed that on YouTube as well. So this week, we're very pleased to be joined by Natasha Huq from GRAS, who will be giving an insight into the Preston Tower project. Natasha is an educator, presenter, and architect. She's an associate at GRAS, and her work focuses on conservation, natural materials, and community engagement. She's the co-founder of the Design Talk series Talks at the Lane and has co-presented the Grand Design spin-offs The Streets and House of the Year. So Natasha's going to give a talk, and at the conclusion of it, there'll be an opportunity to ask some questions, and there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So please use this to submit any questions throughout the session. It doesn't have to be at the end, but obviously once we reach the conclusion, then we'll go through those, and hopefully there'll be plenty of time for Natasha to answer them. But without any more from me, I'd like to pass over to Natasha to begin the talk.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. I'd like to also just say thank you to the RIAS for asking me to speak today on the back of the RIAS Awards. Yeah, I find it just still very amazing that this project is getting so much attention because the built architecture is really only a small percentage of the work, but that's why it's great to get an opportunity to tell you all about some of that work. So thank you all today for coming to hear about it. Okay, so this is a little bit of context. The site is in Preston Pans, which is a coastal location to the east of Edinburgh. It used to be a kind of thriving industrial town, but like many places where industry has declined, it has suffered from a lot of deprivation and a lack of investment. Although recently, yeah, especially in the last few years, there's been a real drive to use its rich cultural heritage to regenerate the town. The site, it's owned by the National Trust for Scotland and it's managed by East Lothian Council. Preston Tower itself is a 15th century ruinous tower. You can see it sitting to the south of the site with a kind of 17th century Renaissance extension on the top. And then there's a 17th century Ducat to the north, which you can see on in the top right-hand corner of this picture. And it's all enclosed within a boundary wall, which are around from the 17th century. And inside there's a somewhat conjectural historic recreation of a pleasure garden that was completed in the 1980s by the council. So it's kind of it was a bit of an odd site in the middle of a very residential area, which had suffered from deprivation, as I said, and also this kind of very lovely garden, but also a kind of nationally important site, but one where you didn't maybe understand what it contained, and it was very difficult to know how to navigate the site, and access wasn't possible into the tower either. Um, the whole site is a scheduled monument, so it's nationally important, and it's also a highly visible landmark. It was the location for many significant political, historical, and social acts, but equally, the garden was a really important public amenity, and it was used as quiet local respite for dog walking, for after school play, and also as a thoroughfare. You can see to the bottom of that picture, there's an adopted pavement, so lots of kids making their way to and from school. Um, so internal access, as I'd said, was hadn't been possible into the tower for decades, and that was a really fierce desire for the community. Many generations of local children had started and finished school without having been able to go inside the tower itself, despite the local primary school being named after it. Many community members had been campaigning for this access for years, and through the Community Council and the local area partnership, funding was secured for a feasibility report, which well, actually wasn't even a feasibility report, it was more of a briefing report, which the council asked us to complete. And part of that brief was to look at the repair and consolidation of the structures, enable safe access inside the tower, because it would have always been accessed from the first floor for defensive purposes, and whatever stair existed wasn't there anymore, whilst also improving the general accessibility and interpretation of the site. And you can see from the pictures on the left, it really was suffering from a lot of disrepair and lack of maintenance. The Ducat roof was falling in, and the south elevation, especially of the tower, was suffering from very high levels of alveolar decay. Um, so during lockdown in 2020, a small seed of a project was formed. We did our report, very short report, and we waited for, funding to become available. We really didn't think that this was going to be a viable project in the near future. And then, quite surprisingly and suddenly, a pot of money, which was intended to go to another project elsewhere, was suddenly redirected to Preston Tower. And remember, this is also during lockdown. But the caveat was that we had to spend it within 9 months, which was, yeah, obviously a ridiculously short period of time. So, with the best of intentions, we came up with very quick design proposals. This was an initial sketch that we did, which shows the stair taking up the full side of the east elevation and looking onto a public square and with this axial path that tried to make sense of the gardens. And then as we rapidly kind of progress through the various stages of, all the statutory consents and even, the tender process, it was it was very clear that it was going to be impossible to deliver the project within those timeframes, for various factors, but the two main factors, first of all, after our ecological surveys, there was a suspected peregrine falcon, which is a Schedule 1 bird, and therefore it has the highest levels of protection. And then number two was the scheduled monument consent, which I had not done before, and it was very complicated. It required a lot of consultation with Historic Environment Scotland. It was very tricky and time consuming, and it wasn't something that could be turned around very quickly. So it became clear that we weren't going to meet those funding timescales, and so the solution was to phase the project. East Lothian Council managed to negotiate with their funders, and then between the design team and the client, we worked out a kind of justified reasoning and then a manageable program that fit the project into split the project into two phases, so that the first phase would be complete and some of the money would be spent within the first deadline, and then we'd be able to push some of that extra money into the second phase and get some additional funding as well. So, in essence, the first phase consisted of repairs to the Ducat and boundary walls, new accessible paths, landscaping, and interpretation. But crucially, it also included sampling, surveying of the tower, upskilling of the contractor, and a lot more investigative work to the tower. And then the second phase was consolidation of the tower itself, for the repair and consolidation of it, its interpretation, and the installation of a new external stair to provide access to the first floor interior. So instead of a 9 month project, it ended up being a 4 year project, which, in the long term, it was actually the best thing that could have happened, because it allowed a gradual understanding of the site. As I said, with the first phase, we were able to do lots of sampling and investigative work, and also just, bed in, be there, understand it. It eased the statutory consent procedure because we weren't trying to get all of the consents in one go. Crucially, it allowed us to engage with the community, and it also allowed for a really good working relationship to develop between the client and the design team. It allowed for, because we had to let the contract, so the contractor was appointed for the whole thing, even though it was phased. And that allowed us to upskill the contractor in specialist conservation techniques, but also establish this kind of common understanding and a language, so that when we went to the second phase, which was the tower, which was kind of the much more meatier project, we already had established, a very good working relationship. And then the last thing, it allowed us to very carefully prioritize the work and understand each decision so that we knew we were making the best investment overall for the project. And it turns out after all that, we didn't even have a peregrine falcon. It was just a sparrowhawk with some very strange eating habits. Okay, so this is a kind of summary of the actual proposals in red. So rather than a kind of wholesale refurbishment or architectural project, it was kind of collection of precise interventions which together make a large impact. And it meant that every decision and every intervention had a huge amount of work and decision making behind it. So it's that kind of unseen work that I really want to talk about today. Uh, okay, so part of that was historical research and surveying. So there's a process of kind of meticulous forensic stone by stone surveying. The middle picture, that's me and a colleague on a cherry picker, swaying in the wind, and we looked at each stone. And so it meant that we were able to really focus the repairs, so we could make the best use of the funding. And so it wasn't just the repairs for the immediate capital project. We could also identify maybe particular stones that we knew may need repair in 5, 10 years time, so that could be recorded. And then it means that the client can then plan for the future, and they know when they'll need to, do another phase of the project or another repair round of repairs. The other thing that it did was it helped us with the historic phasing, and that was really important for statutory consents, for technical reasons, and also for kind of interpretation reasons. So an investment getting the cherry picker, but really useful because that happened in phase one while we were working on the Ducat and so forth. We were able to kind of plan for the next phase. Um, so yeah, that information gathering and then the communication of that information was super important. As I said, it allowed us to understand the phasing. So we were able to do these kind of phased drawings. And then we also, so I'm just going to go back to the first slide. So this image that I took up with me and was able to sketch over was a high definition photogrammetry, which we did in-house. So I can even look at each stone. But after that, we got AOC archaeology to do photogrammic applied, I think it's called orthomosaic model. But this was a 3D model. You could spin around it, but it was high definition. And that was really good for surveying purposes, for communication purposes, for engagement. So on all different levels, community engagement, but also statutory proposals. We were able to talk through things with Historic Environment Scotland. So it was a really very useful piece of investment that, even though it was before repairs, we still use it today to discuss the tower because obviously access is difficult. So in terms of the statutory consent process, each application involved a lot of research, and we had to split the statutory applications into 10. I think it ended up being 10 different applications because as it was a scheduled monument, you needed the research and the investigations to justify the proposals, but then you needed statutory consent to carry out the investigations, even lime water sampling or stone sampling or just kind of doing trial pits. So it became this process where we'd apply for a consent, we'd get the consent, we'd do the work, and then that work would inform the next consent or the, two consents afterwards. So it became this really kind of iterative process. And then everything kind of informed the next phase. More of the unseen work. This was incredibly important, the community engagement. It's very much a community project. And we carried out kind of regular and varied community consultation. And so it was us, the architects, but Lindsay Clark and Steve from Artie Brand, Steve Kirkpatrick from Artie Brand, they were really important in that process, and ELC as well. So we had kind of varied things going on. We had first of all, we had fortnightly meetings with the community council representatives and the client. That was about kind of decision making. Then we had lunchtime drop-ins. When I was in site, I'd kind of do my site meeting and then I'd go to the community centre just for kind of, yeah, a regular drop-in. And, you'd get regulars in. We had scaffold tours, we had formal presentations, we had the 3D animation that I spoke about. That was available to schools. Yeah, lots of skills engagement, posters, leaflets. There was, people kind of doing surveys in the garden at lunchtimes, lots of social media updates. So it was important that that engagement was in a lot of different forms. So it was kind of, analog and digital. It was in person and, online. It was small groups, large groups, including a really successful Doors Open Day that we did at the very start. There was storytelling, historical enactments, performance, and all of this was just really important because it's a really tricky place to do community engagement in somewhere like Preston Pans, which has, it has suffered from deprivation, has high instances of antisocial behaviour. Also, there was a cynicism about this project, and I mean, any kind of cultural project, it's hard to say why, this money is being spent on this rather than schools, hospitals, and so forth. So we had a lot of really good, pleasant community engagement, but there was also, and this is part of it, some really difficult community engagement as well, where we had people that didn't see why we were doing the project, and had concerns which were completely justified. But the important thing, which I've learned over this project, is that all community engagement is useful, even if it's negative. It's just about establishing trust, ensuring people felt heard, and just being there. And that kind of protracted 4-year period was really helpful in that it allowed us the time to be there because there were so many site visits, there was so much investigation. So we were there all the time. We were there every week. It was good. It was very good to just understand the site. Um, And the thing that I've learned, so part of the proposal is about understanding and increasing the accessibility of the site. Increasing the understanding and accessibility of the site, but also, addressing those local perceptions, dynamics, and concerns. So that image that I showed you at the start of the presentation, with this kind of, this vision of this lively, vibrant public square with this kind of stair, this performance stair that would feed the square. It very quickly became clear that this was not needed in Preston Pans. People liked this garden as a quiet local respite. So instead of the public square, we ended up with a contemplation circle. And it also became clear that the Ducat was a really important part of the history of the site, and people were really interested in getting access to that. And so the proposals were changed to create this lovely circuit around the gardens to the Ducat and then back around again, ending at this contemplation circle, storytelling circle that looked back onto the tower. Also, there were, concerns about antisocial behaviour. So there was lots of mitigation measures put in place. There was CCTV. We also made sure there was robust detailing. We made sure that instead of the timber stair that was first proposed, it was changed into a metal stair. So all of this input not all of it was, and all of it informed the project, whether it came to fruition, it didn't matter. All of this information was very, very useful. And the project is absolutely 100% better because of that engagement. Um, and the long-term view, and that engagement was also important to get people to feel kind of ownership of the site, because the long-term view was that the community would take metaphorical ownership, but also run tours and manage the visitor experience, because East Lothian Council, there weren't the resources to do that. So that was a really important part of the project, the kind of the future of what happens after the capital project's finished. So all of this, as I said, about the fortnightly design team and client meetings, it was all a process. It was all the end output of collaborative decision making. So we had East Lothian Council, we had archaeology, the archaeology department, planning and heritage department. We had quantity surveyor. We had the person who was gaining funding. And then we had the National Trust for Scotland, who were really engaged in the project. And that was really important for that kind of really practical conservation advice and future maintenance. As I said, Community Council was very much involved in those fortnightly meetings and in wider discussions. The contractor, as I said, they were brought on board very early on, so they were very much instrumental in the repair techniques and generally smoothing out the on-site process, because there were issues of antisocial behaviour. And I might come onto that at the end if we've got time. And then the design team, really, really collaborative design work and collaboration in a way that I hadn't done before. So it's not just with the structural engineer, but also with the quantity surveyor. We had to be really collaborative because the funding was so difficult and because we didn't really have a defined, measured proposals, because it was all done so quickly and because everything had to be, we had a set amount of money, but we had a lot of provisional sums, so we had to just target it where it was needed and work with the contractor so that everything was kind of above board in terms of the contract. Um, and yeah, lots of, like the community engagement, there's lots of different methods of collaboration. So with the client, with ELC and with National Trust for Scotland, we, and the community, we went through this kind of process of even just all the details were discussed, because we had to do it in the context of, for example, the conservation approach, which National Trust for Scotland were really interested in, but also in terms of the maintenance, the future maintenance and the robustness of the detailing, which East Lothian Council were obviously really interested in, and the community. So, and there were kind of lots of site visits, but also online design reviews, on a whiteboard and sketching over the top. So that was really important. And then going on to kind of contractor collaboration and site collaboration. We used a local contractor, Campbell and Smith, and there was luckily the local the site foreman and stonemason was a local in Preston Pans, Robert, and so we made sure that so they did a lot of the stonework, and we wanted to make sure that the regular repair and the stonework repairs were in their hands, so that they could come back and do those kind of regular maintenance procedures. So we had to kind of match the appropriate skills to specific areas. So Robert carried out a lot of the repairs and the new stonework, but then there was specialist stonework, decorative stonework, where we needed a specialist stone repair contractor, Graciela Ainsworth. So it was about also managing how they all work together. And then there was Scottish Lime Centre Trust, who upskilled the local contractor in hot mixed lime mortar techniques. And so all of this was kind of, managing their teamwork, but also managing who did what, um, and really thinking about the kind of the future maintenance of the project. So, for example, we wanted all of the high level corbels to be repaired because we knew, and they were all delaminating because they were installed. on with the beds that way vertically. So it meant that they were all delaminating, and obviously access would have been very difficult in the future because you need a high scaffold. So we made sure that those were repaired very carefully, whereas the low level repairs could be done on a more cyclical basis. So yes, all of that was quite tricky because we had to, manage relationships and make sure that everyone felt respected because, there were some overlaps. So giving everyone their own agency and kind of self-development and their own particular skills. Um, One of the particularly tricky parts of the repair um, was the south elevation. The reason why it and I'll just quickly show you go back to so this left-hand picture, really, really highly deteriorated. I've never seen such deterioration actually. Tantallon Castle has similar. Um, because various reasons, because of the coastal location, salt-laden wind whipping around that southwest corner, the stone getting wet and then drying out again very quickly because of the south elevation. So lots of different reasons. And then also because it was easily accessed, that lower part of the south elevation, um, there were inappropriate repairs, well-minded repairs, but inappropriate repairs carried out. When we first did the investigation work in that south elevation, the mortar had shells in it. So we kind of, at first glance, thought, oh, this is kind of lime mortar repairs. But then as we dug in, it was very, very hard cement mortar, which all had to be taken out. And when it was all taken out, it was yeah, that lower part of the tower looked it looked like it was about to fall down. It was terrible because the some of the stone was sticking out, but some of it had completely deteriorated. So a very, very difficult solution had to be it was a very difficult process to find a solution. And we consulted many people. We consulted Historic Environment Scotland, National Trust for Scotland, Will Napier from Adams Napier Partnership also helped out. But nobody knew what the answer was because there were these huge gaps. And if we filled those gaps with mortar, as you can see in the middle, then it would create this kind of very heavy, kind of mortar-driven, spongy look to it. So uh, it was very tricky, and we did a lot of sampling. I would say maybe 7 or 8, maybe even 10 samples where we told the contractor this is what we wanted. They did it, and then it just didn't look right, and then they had to do it again and again. And there was a point where, the relationships were quite fraught because, obviously, the contractor was trying to achieve what we wanted them to achieve, but we didn't quite know what we wanted them to achieve. But that process of sampling, and now I know I will feed that into the tender documents where it's not one sample in an area like this, you need to allow for 5 to 10 samples because there's just no way you can specify it in advance. But the end repair, we're all really, really pleased with it because what that repair technique does is it gives you legibility. You can understand where the repair is, but the overall impression of the tower, the character is the same. There's a really, really nice kind of tone that matches in. It's all salvaged stone. It's all hot lime, so it's worn really well. And yeah, it's one of the most successful parts of the project. And the other thing is, it's a technique that I think can be used as a precedent for other alveolar decay. I could speak for hours about this. So if anyone has any questions about this particular thing, let me know. Uh, yes, and then other kind of conservation decisions. This one is a really interesting one. It's a second floor fireplace. I don't know how big your screens are or if you can see these tiny little images, but that top left-hand image is what it was before. So the right-hand pier of this fireplace had completely deteriorated. Someone had put an aquaprop in there in the 70s, and the aquaprop itself was deteriorating. It was kind of rusting. So we knew we had to do something. and no one could really decide what the approach was. So we kind of laid out different conservation approaches, and we drew them out, and we kind of laid out what those were so that we could all agree on a kind of an approach. And interesting, this was an interesting one. And again, for anyone who's interested, I can talk loads more about this, but very quickly, the from a kind of contemporary architectural conservation point of view, or yeah, an intervention point of view, the bottom right hand corner one was an interesting proposal for us in that we were thinking about the steel plate and then a kind of double acro prop that would mimic the width of the pier, but was very much a modern intervention. But interestingly, we ended up doing the absolute opposite, and we ended up restoring this fireplace. And it's very different from the conservation approach that we took to the rest of the tower, which was light touch, only do as much as you need to make it very legible. This was an active restoration. And it was very much pushed by the community, but I think it was absolutely the right decision because what it was after a kind of intense period of neglect and lack of maintenance, this acroprop almost represented that neglect. And so it was almost like an act of respect to restore this fireplace. And then the other thing is we could restore it with knowledge because although it had deteriorated, there was a very similar fireplace on the other side, so we could copy that detail. And that fireplace would have ended up like the former, like this one, in terms of it would have deteriorated very quickly. So whilst we had that detail, we could copy it and restore that detail so it elongates the preservation of the detail itself. It's also a demonstration of Robert's masonry skill, and the fireplace is dated, so it's very obvious that it's of the now. So there's the mark of the stonemason and the preservation of the skill, and almost the celebration of his stonemasonry skills, because everything else was, kind of light touch repair. And then the other thing which I find really interesting is it is a direct connection to the past. It's a single moment that, transports your imagination, and it's this kind of mini museum in the middle of, a kind of a light touch repair project. Um, the other thing, how am I doing for time? Oh, okay, I'll need to whip through. The stair was really interesting, tricky design process as well. So many factors to consider because the archaeology. So one of the first consents was to do archaeological investigations. So we dug around the tower. There were some remnants of Victorian paths, of other structures that had been built there. So we knew where those were, and obviously we could not penetrate those. It was also the conservation approach. Do you copy an old stair? Do you do a really new? What design approach do you take? There's also the thing about robustness and antisocial behavior. So as I said before, it was meant to be a timber stair at the start, but we had to make sure that it was metal because as the design process was going on, there was lots of incidents of arson in the area. But we also wanted to kind of add this sense of tactility and softness. So we had timber treads on a metal structure with a timber handrail, just to add that softness and also the accessibility of the kind of the handrails, where your feet touch and where your hand touches, there's the softness. And then accessibility as well. There were, we did have the discussion about should we put a lift in, and obviously that was completely not viable. But we did increase the width of the stair. At the start, it was a meter. We made it 2 meters so that if there was somebody that needed to go up the stair that perhaps required a helper, there was enough room, enough width for that helper to assist them. And then to counterpoint that, we had access into the basement or ground floor actually. We put in a walkway so that there was kind of not wheelchair accessible, although there have been wheelchairs there, but a more accessible experience of the tower on that ground floor. So lots of factors to consider. Also, I'm running out of time, aren't I? I've got 5 more minutes. And also about the design of the stair. Initially, we had it on the south elevation, but we decided to wrap around that corner. There was a few reasons for that. It allowed direct access off that footpath that I was talking about that was a thoroughfare. Because this was the site of the previous stairs, there was lots of really interesting archaeology. So the stair allows you to view that archaeology as you whip around the corner. Um, and also it kind of breaks up the stair, so it's not just this one run, but it gives you this lovely kind of uh, uh, procession up the stair and into the first floor. Okay, I see. Uh, yes, the other way that the stair was. Oh, I'm losing. Sorry, I don't know what's happened to the screen. Um, Don't know if you can all still see that. Hopefully you can. Yes, so design iteration for the stair. Originally, we had a bespoke stair contractor that was going to detail design and manufacture the stair, and they were really highly qualified craftspeople, but it just didn't feel right because it needed to be more collaborative. So we ended up working with a local blacksmith, Andrew Turner blacksmith, our stonemason, and also Leslie from our structural engineer, who is absolutely amazing, very patient. So we drew from everyone's expertise. We did these kind of whiteboard workshops, but also we ended up going to the blacksmith's workshop and actually building bits of it in one-to-one, getting bits of metal and literally just putting them together like a kind of Lego model, just to really understand how these things would go together because there were so many factors that we had to consider. So, yeah, just coming on to the final project. The paths sit comfortably within the site. They feel like they've always been there. They help provide this journey that's more accessible physically and emotionally. The tower has been repaired. The repairs are legible, but doesn't change the overall character of the tower. And the stair provides a completely new relationship with the tower, both internally and externally. And I will say that these photos were taken straight after the interventions were done. So, it has changed since then. The stone has gone a bit green, but that's to be expected. Um, but that sense of care and craftsmanship it can hopefully be seen throughout all the interventions. And after that, all the open days that have happened, they've been booked out. There's a real appetite to get inside and learn about the tower's history. The feedback has been really great. There's a sense that this project is just the start of something. It's unlocked potential and provided new hope for the community. It's something for the community that's just been done for them. The Friends group, the Friends of Preston Tower, that's properly constituted, and they are they're really taking on board and doing lots of events. Um, just kind of really lovely things. They're doing tours, but there's also this lovely engagement activity where lots of people are crocheting woolen pigeons. And so the idea is that each nest box, there's kind of 200 nest boxes, is going to be filled with woolen pigeons in due course. And so, yeah, it's really what the project has been about, establishing a community asset that meets current project needs, so the repair, the accessibility, the infrastructure, but also aspirational needs, creating the circumstances that the community could take ownership of their heritage and all the well-being and economic benefits that come from that. And part of it was, how do we make the capital project give the best chance of that happening? So part of that was providing a robust maintenance plan. So, all our design decisions were considered with that overall maintenance in mind. So we're protecting that initial capital investment, but we're also creating this kind of regenerative system to ensure the long-term survival of the buildings so that that capital funding is never going to happen again, not in the near-term future, but creating these kind of small pockets of phased work that the community can carry on themselves. So um, that future forecasting, part of that was this maintenance plan. You can see that Excel document on the right. So the maintenance tasks were split into things that the community could do, things that ELC could do without expert advice, in-house, and then things that where you needed, professional advice, and also kind of little packages of next phases that could be done. So 10 past, yeah, that's the 40 minutes. So I'm just gonna finish here for now and talk about just quickly summarize what I have learned over the past over the course of this project. So yes, decision making with long-term view in mind. So it's having the long-term view. What will happen after the capital project? What will happen after the architect walks away? And what can you do now to protect that capital investment? Um, Community knowledge, putting communities at the heart of the design process. So that's local community, but also communities of interest, and seeing their input as a really valuable resource for you rather than just serving them. It's real gold dust. And you're kind of testing the project before the project is built, which is much better than after the fact. Um, Heritage and yeah, the stories that come with it, using that as a tool, as a way of engaging people, but also guiding the project, understanding what the right thing is to do. The heritage gives you that context and framework to apply to your decision making. Sustainability, yes, the care of our resources, both human or cultural and material. So how do you empower people? How can you give them the best chance to make that architecture as resilient as possible? Using local, readily available materials, but also contractors, making sure that they're in place for when you're not there. And then finally, collaboration, recognizing everybody's strengths and expertise and how they work, and knowing what part everyone has to play in the greater whole, and understanding what that is in order to achieve the best possible outcome for the project. Um, and then that's just the final slide, because this is just the core team on the left hand side, and yeah, everyone had their part to play, and the project would not be the same without all of these people. Thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much. That was marvelous. Very rare actually to have a whole presentation on a single project and to really get into the detail. I mean, that's the name of the series, but also look at the bigger picture as well. So it was, yeah, really, really fascinating. Thank you so much. So now we have time for some questions. There is one already in the Q&A from Peter, who asks, who determined the initial 9-month program? It seems relatively short considering the type of work.
Yes. Well, the as I mentioned, there was a pot of money that was meant to go to another project. So I don't know how far that project had gone. I think even it had gone to tender, but it was pulled last minute. So that pot of money, and apologies if this is wrong, I think it was the Town Centre Regeneration Fund, but I'm not entirely sure. Can't quite remember. But that money, it was the council's money, but it still had to be spent. It was given to the council, but it still had to be spent within that same initial time period. So although it was unrealistic, we had to make our best efforts to do it. But then the East Lothian Council were very good at negotiating with Scottish Government how that money could then be spent to this project. So it was nobody's fault. It's just the nature of these things. But it was the best thing for the project because it gave that time and that understanding. As in we we got to the point of tender, and then we had that contractor on board, and then we had a really long time period. So that was really good in terms of being able to work with them and do that phasing, which we might not have done that initially if it wasn't for these factors.
Thank you. Oh, another question has just popped up. Perfect timing. So Rosemary asks, what was the procurement method for the contractor? Were you involved?
Yes, it was a traditional procurement. East Lothian Council did that through, I think, yeah, the public contracts website. Uh, and so, yes, it's traditional tender. I think I can't remember how many contractors we went out to. Definitely five at least, but I'm not sure how many returned. So, yeah, traditional procurement. Can one visit the tower 24/7? It's oh, you're on silence, Owen. Sorry, Owen, you're on silent.
Sorry, I'm doing my best to keep the background noise out and get myself out. Yeah, so Mark is in has asked a question about opening hours. He says, "Can you visit 24/7? Uh, what's access
So no, you
like?"
can't visit. So well, you can visit the gardens during daylight hours. I mean, I'm not sure what when the opening hours are, but I mean it's open daily because it's used as a thoroughfare. So it's open during the day. The gardens are. But the whole problem of this project is that there's no one to kind of manage the visitor experience. It's all been put to the community to do that. So the community is or the friends group. It's just a bunch of volunteers who obviously need to volunteer their own time. So you can't access the tower unless they open it, and they open it as much as they can, but it's in advance. There are open days. I think they're now doing it every week, but I'm not sure. You have to check their Facebook page for that. But basically, you book tickets. They're free, but you book tickets, and then there are tours that happen in the tower. And then there are also plans to do kind of schools engagement and so forth, but it has to be done in advance. It would be fantastic if it was opened every day. There's a aspiration for it to be opened every day, but obviously that needs resource, and there's no funding for that.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Uh, so another question in the Q&A. Ruth asks, "Can you tell us more about the stone infill repair techniques, those big gaps?"
Yes, I would be delighted to. So, as I said, very difficult repair because there was such a differentiation between the stones that had really highly deteriorated and then the stones that were all that hadn't deteriorated as much. So that differential was huge. So if we were to repair from here to here, you would end up getting very large areas of mortar, or you would end up replacing the stone with big blocks of stone, which would have changed the character and appearance of the tower. And also, then there would have been loss of original stone. So, really tricky. So, what we had to do was create this pinning technique. And that pinning technique itself had to go through a period of iteration. So we used a mixture of salvaged stones, some salvaged from the tower, some salvaged from it was at Locker Briggs that the contractor had. And then what we did was we split, well, we as in the stonemason, split that salvaged stone along its natural bed, but hand split. So there was no sawing techniques done. It was all hand split. But because it was this natural bed, it created these kind of horizontal tiles, but with they weren't rectangular, they were kind of naturally shaped horizontal tiles, which then they could use to fill in the gaps. And then the gaps, we knew we couldn't do it right to the face because, as I said, then it would be too much. There'd be too much mortar. So we set that back to make it legible. And then the hotline uh, had a very, very nice tone. So it just kind of made it all very harmonious. Yeah, but it was very tricky because also, where you set back, that kind of had to change as well because the differentials had changed throughout the tower. So there was a lot of sweetening, I'll say. And the other thing which was tricky and which Brian Dixon from National Trust for Scotland was always kind of, 'cause this was all done with Brian and Robert, the contractor, and Will Napier and the team from Grass. It was all done in collaboration. Remember, we were doing this close up on the scaffold, so we didn't know what it was going to be like when the scaffold came away. So it was this moment where we all kind of held our breaths and then looked at it, and then kind of was breathed a sigh of relief and thought, yes, this was definitely the right approach.
I mean, when we visited, that actually was one of the things that just jumped out at me immediately. I think partly because a little bit sort of low level, so it was kind of right in front of you. But I was really struck by, I guess, as you sort of alluded to, I guess the sort of the judgment that you made as architect and working with the contractor and the various collaborators. It wasn't of a sort of doctrinaire approach to heritage. We've got to make it look new, or make the intervention stand out in some way. it was a sort of really felt actually the approach was actually adding something to the building that was really positive and had its own particular aesthetic, but at the same time didn't shout. It blended in, and I think it was incredibly effective. It looked like historic repair rather than something that had been done recently. And yeah, I I'm very glad you spoke at length about that because that was something that really struck me in the sort of thought process behind it. There's now lots of questions coming in. So I think Fiona was the first. We got questions in the Q&A and the chat. So we're kind of hit from two directions. So Fiona says, what was the metal treated with? What was the finish?
Yeah.
And how long will it last before requiring maintenance? And how does that compare to timber? Um,
Excellent, excellent question. Thank you very much because again, there was a lot of kind of discussion that went into this. So the metal it's just galvanized metal, but we didn't want it to be kind of shiny. We wanted to tone it down. So it was the same technique that happened on all the new grills. They're all new grills on the tower because they were at the point of deterioration, the old ones. So it's just galvanized metal, but it's being brushed with acid etch, so a tea wash, which is usually the preparation that you use to then paint it. But it was just done like that because we went through a process of saying if we painted it, what would happen? Then it would chip after, not long, after a year, and then that would be a process of having to maintain that. That would be a burden on the community. If we powder coated it, okay, it might have lasted longer, but as soon as you chip powder coat, then there's a massive investment to repair that. So we wanted to make it as low maintenance as possible. Now, the one thing that it's good to talk about what you're unhappy with as well. The one thing that I am disappointed about in the project is the staining that has happened to the metal structure, and that is not the finish. What has happened is the timber treads that we put in, there was concern again about ASB, and we actually ordered replacement treads in case one of them did get destroyed. So that was another thing that they needed to be able to be removed and replaced. But on top of that, we put in a fire retardant. And what happened is the fire retardant leached out of the stair treads. So if you do go down and you see these kind of drips and this kind of uh, white marks over the stair. That is not the finish. The finish would have actually been brilliant if the leaching hadn't occurred. So the leaching of the fire retardant has created these white marks. But hey, we were doing our best. So and it is fading.
uh, Next question, I guess sort of follows on from that in a way. Were there any elements that were designed that didn't make it into sight? And I guess we could also add, is there anything that you might have done differently if you had the chance to do it again?
I mean, lots of, and as I said, every decision was this huge thought process. And so all of that was thought through, and then the architecture that emerges is a kind of tiny portion of all of that work, but it's an outcome of that process. So yes, there were lots of things. So we were going to, have access to the second floor, which is hopefully, part of the next phase, but it's just has been this huge iterative process. So all of those things are still bubbling, and hopefully will be done. What was the other part of the question?
Is there anything you might have done
Oh, differently.
differently
Yes,
or anything? Yes, and
that thing.
anything that, yeah,
Yeah, I would.
additional that didn't
Yeah,
make it.
I would have taken the chance. I wouldn't have put the fire retardant on. Or if the manufacturer had told us that, we could have just let the leaching happen somewhere safe, wait for the leaching to finish, and then put them in. But we did not. I mean, I looked back on that, and to be fair, the supplier did give a goodwill gesture and paid for the stair to be cleaned. But yeah, that's what I would do differently.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a few very specific questions. So can you tell us the construction tender cost and did it complete on budget?
Oh God. So I think. it was around 1 million, and I think the end contract was ended up being 1.2 million. But remember, this was over the course of a long period of time. So it was on budget in terms of where we allocated budget, we worked to that budget. So, for example, the repair, but this was always a moving feast. So, when we decided, for example, that it was really important for the fireplace to be restored, the council then made that decision to get extra funding for the fireplace. So it was this kind of collaborative process. It was never a set budget with a set brief. The goalposts were always moving. Um, so you have to ask the client that question.
I don't know if there's a client representative here. Maybe there is. Another question from David. Did you use different mixes of mortar for different parts of the repairs to the structure?
Yes. So, for example, the Ducat, that was done in the middle of winter. So, for example, there was a hair added to the mix and some other additive to help with the setting over winter. We tried generally to keep to the same mortar recipe because then that would be easy for the future repair. If we had lots of different complicated mixes, then that would become complicated for future maintenance. But there were different stones used. So the lower, and because of the phasing, um, the lower part of the tower, that was the kind of red sandstone. So that mixture of salvage stone, including Lockerbergs, I can't quite remember the other two. The corbels were cut crag, and then that upper blonde sandstone, that kind of Renaissance top, that was Hazeldine stone. So similar mortars, but different stones.
And then continuing that sort of line of questioning, Ruth asks, what timber did you use for the handrail?
It was Akoya and Akoya treads, again for maintenance and longevity. Uh, yeah, maybe I would have used a different timber as well. I'm not sure.
Um, we've probably got time for just a few more questions now. An anonymous attendee says, what was the process for the community engagement? Was there an open public forums or smaller focus sessions? What were your methods for recording, reviewing feedback from these, and what was taken forward?
Okay, I mean, lengthy, varied community engagement. This answer is going to take more than the 2 minutes we have, but in summary, we had to make it varied. So there was the fortnightly meetings where, and I think DJ, I can see there's a comment from him. So DJ spent he community council, but also was representing the community at these meetings, and gave up his time to attend fortnightly meetings and was part of every decision that was made at those meetings. If not there, then in minutes afterwards. Um, so that was a very kind of uh, as in he was very much in the middle of that design process as a community representative, and then feeding back to the community council. And then there was kind of more indefinite engagement. So lunchtime drop-ins, as I said, I'd go to site and then go to the community centre just for a lunchtime drop-in. And then there were actual surveys that happened on Facebook, but also in person at the gardens, literally clipboard questions, and then those were all fed in. There were social media updates, there were presentations. All of that was recorded in minutes, and it all fed in to the decision-making process. Whether or not it came to the final decision, it was all discussed, and then what everyone felt right came in the decision that we went with. Sorry if that answered your question. Don't know if it answered it.
Yeah, no, definitely. We're approaching end. I've just got one question I wanted to ask, which is about the interpretation
Oh yes, God.
Could you talk a little bit about that? Was that something that you led on, or was that
So again, collaborative process, but very much, Lindsay and Clark and Stephen Kirkpatrick, they were absolutely amazing. They were very much part of the community engagement process. And so part of that community engagement was getting information, but also, in terms of the interpretation of the tower, they had this amazing accessibility approach where they made sure that whatever was in the tower on the first floor also was on the ground floor. Um, so lots of things. There's an art trail, and there's these little kind of brass rubbings where kids can go and rub a picture, but the picture relates to something on the history of the site. And there's a little bit of braille underneath as well. And then that's kind of a little bit. And then in the tower itself, there's a projection that is mapped onto the fireplace where the tours are given. There are interpretation boards at three areas at the tower for the site and at the Ducat. Um, yes, so a number of bits of interpretation.
terrific? We've reached 1/2 past, which means we have to draw things to a close. So, Natasha, thank you so much for a wonderful talk and presentation, and for answering many questions. It was great to, I think it's a testament to the project that it sparks, such interest and such discussion. So, thank you so much. As I said at the beginning, the recording will be uploaded onto YouTube shortly, so it'll be available there. Next week, we are joined by Colin Bailey, who is going to speak about his project, Yoram, which was the winner of the RIAS CFT Timber Award and the RIAS the Sustainability Award. And that's another wonderful project. So I do recommend you tune in for that. And I think we hope that these sessions will encourage, more discussion and hopefully more submissions to the awards panel for next year. So thank you, Natasha, once again. Thank you for inviting me to chair this, and goodbye. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.